Hey, what is up, guys? It is Slcmof here, back again with another video. And for the first time in quite a while, I am joined by my good friend Jake, of course, IRGen. I've not made a video in 5 months. I just did my first video a couple of days ago, and now my second video here I'm doing here with Jake. So thanks for hopping on, and really look forward to doing these two videos with you today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for letting me on the channel again. It's been a minute.
It has been a minute. So, in this video, we wanted to talk about the Joker and whether or not the Joker is going to be in Gotham Knights. Obviously, for a myriad of reasons, it's worth discussing this. One being obviously not having Batman in the game, at least allegedly at this point. That's what they're saying. Is it could have implications for sales figures and that sort of thing. And one way that they could really create a lot of hype and PR around the game is to have a surprise Joker reveal. Like Joker and Batman are just two wild cards, no pun intended, that whenever utilized, they always seem to pay off and generate hype and buzz, whether it be in film, movies, anime, like film and movies are the same thing, film, animated shows, video games. Like it doesn't really matter what it is. They always like bring the money in and bring hype. So you were telling me, I didn't know this. You were telling me that they've said officially that the Joker is not in the game. Is that true? For one, when did they say that? And two, do you believe it? Because I have my doubts.
Yes, so that was actually a comment that was made probably a few weeks to a month ago, where they were getting asked questions about the game. There were some interesting ones, such as someone asked about Damian Wayne's involvement in the story, and Patrick Redding, the creative director, said, "I can't say anything because that's a huge spoiler." And then so that's led a lot of people to believe that Damian Wayne will play a big role in the story. But one of the questions that was asked, I don't remember if it was that same interview or another interview at the same event, but it was asked if Joker would be in the game, and they confirmed no Joker. They also said that there's no Batmobile. But the one caveat to Joker being absent from the game is that they are heavily implying that Harley Quinn will appear in the game. So even though Joker will likely not be in the game, his presence will be felt throughout the game.
Yeah, so two things that I think are really interesting in this conversation and this video. Let's assume that they are correct that the Joker's not in the game. I'm not necessarily convinced that that's the case. They've said that Batman is dead, not in the game. I don't believe that either. So, and that's fine, by the way. I'm not calling them liars. I'm just calling them good marketers. So I'm not saying that it's bad for them saying this, and or maybe it's totally true and accurate. I have no reason to believe that it's not the case per se, but I also think from a marketing perspective, if it is the case that he is in the game, of course they're not going to disclose that because they want to have the hype online that leads people to purchase the game. So we can talk a little bit about that. But two things that I think are really interesting. One, how the Joker could be utilized in a DLC form, and ways that he could be utilized in classic retellings of graphic novel stories. I have a few ideas for DLC that we can discuss. The second part, um, in terms of Harley Quinn's involvement, is that's really interesting because if obviously the Joker and Harley Quinn are connected in more ways than one, and as such, it does seem that even if Harley Quinn is in the game, Joker's impact on the game may be felt. Thirdly, I also am really intrigued to know if in this game they will explore the backstory and origin between Batman and the Joker. And to some extent, I actually understand the notion of excluding the Joker because the whole two sides of the same coin thing and blah, 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 blah. And without one, you can't have the other. So with Batman being dead, my question just is, where is Joker in this universe? I know we know that he's not dead. At least that hasn't been confirmed. So where do you think the Joker is in this universe at this point? Even assuming that that WB Games Montreal is telling the truth, and the Joker will have nothing to do with the story at all.
I think it's really interesting because the Joker has already left a major mark on this story. We know that Barbara Gordon has already gone through a form of paralysis. It sounds like that's being watered down a bit so that her rehabilitation to being able to not only walk but fight crime again is a bit more realistic and tasteful, as opposed to having a complete spinal fracture and complete loss of mobility in the legs to suddenly being able to use them again. So it sounds like that has been altered a bit, but as we all know, that harkens back to the famous Killing Joke that involves Joker, as the title would suggest. And we also have Jason Todd, aka Red Hood, as a protagonist in the game, and we know that he is a resurrected version of the character. And the the reason that Jason Todd ended up dead is also because of Joker. So I think that even if Joker is not a figure in this game with a character model, his presence will linger heavily over this iteration of Gotham City. And I think that it is a difficult decision that they have to make, because they either have to try and recreate an iconic character, reimagine him for their version of Gotham Knights, as opposed to Mark Hamill's really groundbreaking take on him in the Arkham series, or they can just choose to exclude him and have him be sort of a looming presence over the story. And I think part of that could be by having Harley Quinn take the lead as well. It's also worth noting, in that first 15 minutes of gameplay that they showed, Batgirl, when she's fighting the thugs, passes a truck with the spray painted Joker's graffiti on it, and Joker's is a reference to sort of the gang that rises up after the Joker is gone. We saw it in Batman Beyond. And this is an interesting take on the lore of Gotham City, because it's not futuristic in the sense that Batman Beyond was, but it almost feels like they're taking a lot of the circumstances of Batman Beyond and bringing them forward, bringing the need for some of Batman's proteges to rise up and become the new Dark Knights of the city. And so I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if in this universe Joker is dead. And for all we know, maybe Jason Todd went on a killing spree when he came back from the dead and killed Joker. We don't know. Again, there hasn't really been anything to indicate that that's the case. But I'm with you as well that I would not be surprised if Joker is more involved with the game than they are leading on right now. But either way, I think Joker is going to have a very big role in the story. And all that really remains to be determined is if that means he will have a physical presence in the game or just an emotional one over the characters and their backstories.
That's a super interesting point. I was watching, I believe it was either Patrick Redding or Jeff Eleanor, I can't remember who, was talking about the way in which the heroes are sort of perceived in the game and their foils. And I think that one thing that they're trying to do is usher in sort of the second generation. We're seeing sort of the sequel to the first generation of this saga, and the first generation obviously being like Batman and Joker and that sort of thing. So it wouldn't actually surprise me. It would be kind of an interesting creative choice if the Joker and Batman died simultaneously. Maybe they were, we I guess part of that lookbook was kind of leaked in the opening frames of the game. And to your point, there was nothing that indicated per se that the Joker died in this way. But that is fascinating with the tease of the Jokers and Batman Beyond and all of those sort of things, indicating that this could be a post Joker and post Batman era. And I think that from their perspective as well, from a strategic sense, what is sort of the natural evolution of the Joker character, sort of the second generation or embodiment of that, and that would obviously be Harley Quinn. And so it kind of makes sense to pass the buck to Robin, Nightwing, Batgirl, etc., and then do the same with not having the Joker, but instead having Harley Quinn in his place. Harley Quinn is younger, and it just kind of makes sense from a chronological perspective for them as well. I also do, however, could see some surprise reveal or some surprise involvement in two different ways. One would be exactly what you had mentioned in terms of flashback scenes, right? We saw this in Batman Arkham Knight, a flashback scene to the Killing Joke, and then obviously in Under the Red Hood, those flashbacks could be seen as well. Another thing that was said by Jeff Eleanor, where actually it might have been Patrick Redding in one of the trailers, is that um, Red Hood starts off the story and he's angry, like extremely, extremely angry. And I think as time goes on, he becomes more rolled in. This is at least what he was indicating in this trailer that I was watching, that he becomes more rolled into the Bat family, becomes a little bit more accepting of this no killing rule, which he does adopt for the whole game. They've said that he's not going to be, murking people or murdering anybody in the game. But early on, he really has this sort of anger and rage, being recently resuscitated, at least presumably from the Lazarus pit, and also having these weird mystic superpowers that, yes, have kind of existed in the comics and animated series and those sort of iterations in the past, but in this game, they're really taken to an extreme where Red Hood is more like a superhero with superpowers than a regular Bat family member, which is really, really interesting and different than any iteration that we've seen of him in the past. So, I think from that sense, sort of passing the mantle on to Harley Quinn from the Joker makes sense. Secondly, I think that I would have to look at the actual wording of how they said he is or is not in the game. Like maybe he's not alive, but he is still involved in the game via flashbacks or that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah. In regards to the Batman character, I remember distinctly one of the first interviews that Patrick Redding did. He was asked if Batman would be involved in the game, and his response was he's not playable. So to me, that leads me to believe that he is involved pretty heavily in the game to an extent, whether that means he has been brainwashed by the court or if he is, going to be a Talon, or if we're just going to see him extensively in flashbacks. But that does seem to be a good indicator that Bruce Wayne will have a pretty hefty role in Gotham Knights, at least to some degree. And who knows, they're really very specifically talking about how what they've mentioned in terms of content really only applies to the base game. There have been a number of interviews where they say we're not going to talk about our DLC yet. And so there could be a lot of potential for some of the characters like Batman and Joker to have a bigger role in some of the story DLC that launches after the game. And so I do believe them in the sense that I don't think that Batman is going to be a playable end game character after the campaign, but I could see him showing up in DLC. We could get a story DLC that takes place before the events of Gotham Knights, or we could see one that takes place after if he is in fact alive and gets recovered by the Bat family in the story. I also feel that, especially if the base game does not reach fantastic sales on the same level that the Arkham games did, I could see Warner Brothers really pushing Warner Brothers Games Montreal to include characters like the Joker as story DLC or as villains that they add into Gotham City post launch to really help get sales going and to get people more invested in some of these huge characters that everyone knows and just to put in some of those heavy hitters.
Well, yeah, and like you said, with Red Hood and Batgirl in particular, they obviously have intense connections with the Joker character that they just don't to the same extent with Harley. Now, one thing that's exciting is to be able to see um, what vacuum sort of emerges after in sort of a post Joker era in Gotham. So whether that be Harley Quinn and whether she's leading this sort of Joker's gang mob sort of thing, or whether it's totally disconnected, that remains to be seen, obviously. As for DLC, I think this is a very interesting question and discussing different ways that they could go with it. One thing that I would like to see more with the DLC stories, going back to the Batgirl DLC in Batman Arkham Knight, I found this to be quite disappointing because there wasn't a very compelling plot or storyline. You're saving these three hostages. You have a boss fight at the end of the game. It's not exactly the worst thing in the world, but not really the best. One idea that I had for Gotham Knights DLC is to actually genuinely create playable versions of these stories. Now, that's not to say that and by these stories, I'm of course referring to Under the Red Hood, The Killing Joke, etc. Now, that might be controversial to some sense. Why would they? What's the point in having you'll hear this all the time. What's the point in creating a game or a movie that's exactly like the comics? That's just superfluous. Like, I don't see it that way at all. Like playing through a graphic novel or a story line that we've seen in the past is completely different than just reading it. And they can, of course, make their own spin on it, and you can expound upon it. I mean, the Killing Joke graphic novel is 60 some odd pages. You're telling me you can't create a 2-hour DLC that includes additional bonus content and subplots and storylines in it? We obviously, well, okay, they tried to do that in the movie, the Killing Joke movie. That didn't work. But I
As
trust
I was gonna
WB
say, they
Montreal's
they could add a
instincts.
special rooftop scene in a.
Well, thankfully Batman is not alive, so they can't pull any shenanigans and try to pull that off here. Also, the game's rated T, so no R rated explicit scenes. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, that it's a great point, and I really think that there is a ton of opportunity to and feature these characters in a story capacity, because I do think that we have to consider general mass audiences, right? So putting aside you and I, and we've seen the animated series, we've read a number of comics and these graphic novels, we're familiar with these stories. But let's take the average, everyday person. They know who the Joker is. They've seen multiple movies with the Joker in them. They've seen multiple Batman movies, and that's probably their extent of their exposure to Batman. They've seen The Dark Knight, they've seen Batman 1989, and maybe if you're lucky, they've seen the Batman. So that's the average person. They even Harley Quinn might be like, if it wasn't for the Suicide Squad movies, they wouldn't really know who she was. Of course, even though she was famous since the 90s. It has been super well known in our circles, but to the average audience, they didn't even know who she was until Margot Robbie started playing her, right? So I think from a DLC perspective, it would be incredibly wise for them to utilize either the Batman character or the Joker character in some way. Now, certainly a flashback scene in the main story is going to generate hype and buzz. Let's take them at their word for it that the Joker isn't involved, which I will say, admittedly, is um, a bit of a disappointment to some extent. I feel as though not including Batman is obviously a bold, creative choice that is going to have implications for sales and mass pop culture exposure and all these sort of things. Again, putting aside the person that's watching this video that doesn't care because they already have seen so many pieces of content with the Joker. Like in our comments, everybody's saying, we've seen so much Joker that we're tired of seeing him. That's just not the consensus amongst the average viewer or the average moviegoer, the average gamer who is interested in the DC Comics lore and sort of this periphery, tertiary kind of way, like the 99%. But of course, the 1% that it is watching two nerds like us talk about this for minutes and minutes on end is in a different boat. But taking again the mass audience appeal and what most average people want to see, I think a DLC selling the Joker in some way, or whether it be Under the Red Hood or whether it be The Killing Joke, would be incredibly successful. I think it would be so successful that people would buy the game just to play that DLC and just to play through the Joker. That is the level of power and magnitude that this brand has. So my point being is that I'm totally fine with them not including Batman. I think that a nice compromise could have been having the Joker in the game. And the reason why is that it would have been really interesting to see how the Joker is responding to the death of Batman. I can just sort of imagine almost like this like Thor moment in Avengers Endgame, where like Joker's like sad and like fat, and he doesn't even like want to go out and like do crimes anymore because he's like, I don't have Batman. Like, there's no point.
He could
Um,
like paint his smile upside down or something.
yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah, yeah. Like I think that there's something interesting that could have been done there to show that it's more than just the Bat family that is missing out on Batman and the impact that has had on Gotham. But no less, let's take that creative choice at its face and not challenge it. I'm definitely going to challenge the notion that Batman's not in the game. I'm definitely going to challenge that. But let's take them at their word for it for Joker. In terms of DLC, what do you think would be really interesting, and how do you think they could include him in a DLC component?
I think that, as you've mentioned, there's a lot of lore with these new Bat family characters. I think that, again, in the mainstream, everyone knows the rivalry between Batman and Joker. But, I mean, Batgirl had a night where she was paralyzed by the Joker, and then Joker proceeded to take pictures of her, kidnap her father, and drive him nearly to insanity by just showing him a slideshow of these images as he's in this deranged, twisted amusement park that the Joker has set up for him. So I think it's safe to say that Barbara Gordon does not really care for the Joker. I think that it's also fair to say that Jason Todd was not a fan of the Joker when he was being murdered by him and had to come back resurrected. And I think that one thing, as I've gone back and been replaying the Arkham games in preparation for Gotham Knights, that I've noticed is that as much as I love them and as much as I think they really did the best that they could with the formula that they had at the time, games were just made differently than they are today. Games weren't really designed with this cinematic experience in mind. It was all gameplay focused. So while there were plots to those games, and while I would argue that they actually started to revolutionize how games can tell stories, and especially comic book stories, and really paved the way for games like Spider-Man, I'd argue that a game like Arkham Asylum does not have the same level of cinematic character development that you see in something like Spider-Man. Now, I do think that the story is different, the character development is shown, not told. I would say is probably the best way to put that. But I think that nowadays we have those Naughty Dog experiences where it can get really cinematic and where there is a lot of gameplay potential that doesn't even feature combat. And I think that going through some of these famous Batman stories to set up the context of the Joker in this universe would be fantastic. I think that, again, Jason Todd, Barbara Gordon all have really horrible experiences with the Joker in their past, and I think that that to contextualize that for, again, those mainstream players who have not read those stories would be really good and really compelling. That's one thing, looking back at the Suicide Squad films that you mentioned. Um, that first one in particular, I think one of the big reasons that it didn't connect with a lot of people was because it didn't really go through the origin of Harley Quinn. It showed a handful of very brief flashbacks as opposed to really taking us through her psyche and getting us to understand where she was coming from. And I could see Gotham Knights ending up in a similar situation. I think that people will like the game, and I think that the story is self-contained enough, or at least seems self-contained enough, that if you don't know the whole backstory, you're still going to enjoy it and you're still going to connect with the characters. But I think, again, to just contextualize that and really give the players an understanding of these characters and why they are the way that they are, why Jason Todd is so angry, how his death and resurrection came about. I think that you're just going to connect with a lot more people, and you're going to encourage a lot of those players to go and read those stories if they haven't, and really start to understand the Batman mythology. Similarly to how the Arkham games got a lot of people really interested in the Rogues Gallery for Batman.
I absolutely agree with this, and you've raised a great point that looking at um, one thing that's been really interesting and one of my big complaints, again, given the context of exactly what you're saying, that we're critiquing games that are a decade old that came before Spider-Man PS4 and Naughty Dog games and these other games that have really revolutionized the amount of cutscenes with character moments and really more like a being a playable movie. Obviously, I would say Last of Us 2 are probably leaders in that front, but even actually like Telltale games have had a role in that. Like there's a bunch of different games that have really had a big impact on this and have led us to where we are with these incredibly cinematic um, stories that have phenomenal gameplay, yes, but also really focus heavily on the story and cutscenes. And if you play a game like Batman Arkham Asylum, you're exactly right. It is heavily um, it's heavily gameplay based, and any advancements in the plot are not so much character moments, but they're more plot moments that are being to advance the story and lead the character to the next gameplay moment, right? Batman Arkham Knight started to introduce a few different things like that to try to change that, and as the games progressed, we got more and more of those moments. In this game, one thing that really excites me is that I actually think we're seeing a lot of this stuff. We're seeing a lot of more of the Spider-Man PS4, more than Naughty Dog like cutscene moments. You know, they've released several cutscenes at this point where Red Hood is struggling with his resuscitation or revival or whatever you want to call it from the Lazarus Pit and some of the powers that he's had. We see a cutscene between Dick Grayson and Barbara Gordon, just like in the Belfry, exercising, working out, and then getting into an disagreement, and then at the end they hug it out. Like those sort of scenes you never really saw in Batman Arkham City, for instance, or Batman Arkham Asylum, like you had said. Again, that's not to say that they're bad games or it's an apples to oranges comparison in many ways, in many different respects. But in many respects, it's an apples to apples comparison. We're comparing triple. That's why I don't understand multiple comments that I like get every single day of like, why are you comparing these two games? It's like, yeah, why are you comparing two triple A third person action RPG Bat Family games like that have the same characters in them? I like yeah, why would you compare those? They're so different, obviously. No, but not that I'm to stop being sarcastic for a moment. There's a lot of similarities between these games, and there's areas where I'm seeing Gotham Knights improve upon the Batman Arkham games, and that leaves a whole opportunity again for incorporating the Joker and also incorporating story DLC as a way to tell these compelling stories and have more character moments. And that's one of the things that has really excited me about some of the trailers that have been dropping on IGN is that we do get these uninterrupted moments wherein the characters are just talking. They're just in the belfry talking. And they're not talking about necessarily the plot. They're not necessarily talking about, oh, what are the Court of Owls doing? They're just having an intimate character moment. And I think that that's crucial. So, when I see those moments happen, I do start to wish that, again, that we could see them with Batman or the Joker, that sort of thing. But if nothing else, incorporating that in DLC to at least some degree, I think is compelling.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that again, Gotham Knights is trying to play a double-edged sword kind of game where they want to not be associated with the Batman Arkham games, but they also don't want to retread the ground that the Batman Arkham games took. But I think that they're reaching a bit of a an impasse at these two different points of view where again, they're trying to not do what the Arkham games did, but they also don't want to take place in the same continuity. And I think that that puts you in a position where you kind of have to acknowledge to a degree at least similar events to the ones that we saw take place in the Batman Arkham games. Because the Batman Arkham games actually kind of built up this universe where Batman gets the Bat family, actually, all the members of the Bat family that are in this game, Tim Drake, Barbara Gordon, Dick Grayson, they're all in Arkham Knight. Batman allegedly dies at the end of Arkham Knight, and it seems like that's right where Gotham Knights picks up.
They die
The
in the same
only,
exact way.
yeah. And so I think that what's tricky is that they don't want to go back and retell the Rocksteady stories, which I think is completely fair, but they
Yep.
also kind of want to move forward. And I feel like they put themselves in a little bit of a corner where we need some context on these characters. And the only way to do that is to sort of retroactively go back and show us what this universe's version of those events were. Because I think that right now, I mean, I still get comments all the time of people telling me, Poison Ivy can't be in the game because she died in Arkham Knight, because I'll make a video talking about villains that have
Yeah.
been teased in Gotham Knights. Like, the mainstream thinks this is a continuation of the Arkham series, or again, maybe didn't play the Arkham series and feel like this will be a good jumping off point. And so I feel that maybe they were a bit too fast in writing off the Arkham games, and maybe should have advertised this as a bit more of a soft reboot, and said this won't narratively be in the same universe, but go check out those Arkham games because it will provide you a lot of the context and a lot of similar lore that we are going to be sort of introducing to this world. But I think that again, it just puts them in a difficult position for players who don't know the events of these backstories that they're going to be showcasing, and also Arkham fans who now kind of have to reconcile with a different version of the events that took place previously in this universe, but haven't had a chance to see it. And so I think that it's going to put Warner Brothers Games Montreal in an interesting position where they have to give us enough context. I know I keep using that word, but that's the best one for it. We need to understand the context going forward of what has happened in this universe. But I also understand that they don't really want to retread what has already been done. And so I'm not quite sure what the answer to that is. I think that a compromise will probably have to be made in terms of what we end up seeing, whether it's through DLC that takes place in a prequel, flashbacks during the cutscenes. But I think we're going to have to see some of the content that they've maybe been trepidatious about showing just because we've already seen it in other games that have done them so well that they're trying to distance themselves from.
I completely agree with this, and I think that you make a great point. And here's the thing with all of this is that one, I do not blame anybody for thinking that this is a predecessor to the Batman Arkham games because it would make sense. Like you said, it's not like the Bat family in this game is like Batwing and like people that weren't in the Arkham games. No, it's the exact same Bat family that we left off with at the end of Arkham Knight. Again, that's not to say that they copied Arkham or like it's. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that I understand why some people would think like, oh, Batman dies in a fiery explosion and then the existing Bat family takes over. It seems that way. Additionally, of course, based upon the reports that we had anyway, they were making a direct sequel to Batman Arkham Knight with Damian Wayne. And what I think happened, this is just my guess. I have no just a guess, is that game didn't work out for whatever reason, and they kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater, and we're like, okay, so this game didn't work, so we're totally starting fresh. We're building our own universe, like whatever it may have been. There was probably some design challenges associated with following up with Batman Arkham Knight, and also from their perspective, I imagine that they don't want to live in the shadow of Rocksteady at all points. Where even with WB Games Montreal, they received a lot of flack for certain inconsistencies between characters or plot lines between what had happened in Asylum and City and also through Night, and that created some disdain amongst fans. And they probably resented that and said, you know what, like. We don't want to play this game of straddling the line with all this extended lore between the comics and these, the steel books and like all this lore that exists in the universe. In addition to other things that Rocksteady's done, we want to be able to do our own thing. We want to create our own Penguin. We want to create our own Batgirl, our own Red Hood. We want our Red Hood to have these like Lazarus Pit powers that he just doesn't have in Batman Arkham, and we don't want it. We didn't like this Arkham Knight thing. Like we don't want to do that. We don't want him to be the Arkham Knight. We want him to just be a Red Hood or whatever reasoning they had internally. And I think that's totally fair. invalid. It does create certain problems for them, but like you highlighted. Um, but again, going back full circle to the Joker, we've never even seen the Joker in this universe. Exactly to your point, we need a little bit of context in terms of how do these characters get to this moment. I always use the example of like go out to 100 people on the street, ask them, do you know who Batman is? 100 out of 100 will say yes. Do the same thing with Batman's sidekicks, and I haven't done this experiment myself, but I would imagine it's much lower, probably closer to like 10 out of 100. Like even like 70-year-olds that walk, but like everybody, you ask every single person, a much smaller percentage of people are going to know who these characters are. So what that means is you have to be able to provide us a backstory in the game. And if the game is just like, boom, story starts instant, like, you know where we're at, Batman's dead, we got to stop the Court of Owls, like go, mission, like Court of Owls, then it's not going to have enough time to breathe. Even when I see this cutscene, right, with Nightwing and Batgirl, I'm even wondering, like, okay, so in this universe, like, have they dated? Have they not? They're kind of teasing it. They're kind of not. Like, we need some explanation here. And that could be one way in which, again, looping back totally full circle to the start of the commentary, Joker could be implemented in that way in a DLC fashion that I think could make fans really happy and also help us. Like even as people that are really well versed fans, I actually don't know whether or not Nightwing and Batgirl have dated in this universe. I don't know if Red Hood died in the exact same way in this game as he did in the comics. I don't know if Robin was the third Robin. I don't know if Damian Wayne has been Robin at this point. There's so many question marks that I have as somebody that is fairly I'm not an expert at the lore, but I'm fairly well versed of this stuff and these characters and this content. And there's a lot of question marks I have, and there's a lot of assumptions that I have going into the game that I'm assuming, oh, this is going to happen in this way. Well, that's not exactly true. Red Hood is completely different post Lazarus Pit revival in this game than he is in any other iteration of the character. Going back to Batgirl, it's not really the same there either. In New 52, they sort of tease this idea of she's paralyzed and then she gets the spinal surgery. Again, they're kind of changing that up a little bit too. They're sort of borrowing it, but making it slightly different. And good for them. That's all the benefit to them, all the power to them for telling their own story and making their own version of the characters. I do understand why they wanted to abandon Arkham in that sense. But fundamentally, they do need to explain to at least some extent who are these characters, how did they get here, and the Joker is a key part of that. And I think to exclude him altogether would be a big mistake. Now, that could even just be mentioning lines of him. It could even just be like I think it would be bizarre. This is just my opinion. I think it would be bizarre if there is not a single line or mention from Batgirl about being paralyzed by the Joker. Because it just assumes a lot about the audience. It just assumes that the audience understands these things and understands how we got to this place. And I think that that is too wide reaching of an assumption. Like, I think that in order for this game to be successful, it has to appeal to a mass audience. And the way that you do that is by making it accessible to people so that somebody that even know that barely even knows who Batgirl is, beyond maybe the 1960s live action version of it or something, like they're able to jump and understand, like, oh, okay, like the Joker did this, that's why she is the way she is now, that's like then she dated Nightwing or whatever. And but from some of the cutscenes I've seen, um it's twofold. One, I'm excited that they're going to kind of have these intimate character moments that we weren't getting in the Arkham games. Again, just two characters hanging out, chit chatting, maybe having disagreements or conflict that's not based around the storyline of the foil or the Court of Owls or the Joker or whatever it's been in the past. But the second part of that is exactly the point that you're kind of touching on, is that I do want to make sure that we give enough context to the audience. And I think that mentioning the impact that the Joker has had in the universe is very important for this game. Any closing thoughts that you wanted to say on that front?
I think that you've covered it really well. I think that Gotham Knights is in a position to be a really compelling take on the lore of Batman and the mythology of Batman. And I think that in some ways its greatest weakness could also be its greatest strength. The Batman and Joker dynamic is super interesting, but I think that it has been touched on in 4 Batman Arkham games already. We've gotten 4 big AAA games where we've seen the Batman and Joker dynamic. And so I'm more than happy for a game that is going to take those 2 wonderful pieces, arguably, well, not even arguably, just definitively the most famous aspect of that mythology, put them to the side, and then say, all right, here's Kirk Langstrom, here is Oswald Cobblepot, here is Dick Grayson and Barbara Gordon. And then we're going to be forced to take what has always really been the B story of Batman, and it's going to be the A story. And I think that we're going to get to really appreciate a lot of these characters on a level that we never have been able to prior in mainstream entertainment like video games. But I do think that they are also perhaps jumping the gun a bit in terms of overestimating what the audience might know about these characters. And even though it is giving us these really compelling character pieces where we're getting to see these characters interact, it's also potentially leaving out some of the backstory into why they know each other and why they are the way that they are. And I think that that is equally as important. So ultimately, I'm really excited for the game. I am a bit anxious to see how it gets pulled off, but I do have a lot of faith in the developers. Patrick Redding, as I've said in videos past, and as some may know, was the creative director of one of the most recent Splinter Cell games, and it was a fantastic action stealth game. It had a really compelling narrative to it. And so I think that the team that they have is really great.
It's a
And I
very
think that
gifted team, very talented.
it really is. It's just, I think that they're being so secretive about the game for good reason. I think there's going to be a lot of times that they're going to try to pull the rug out from under us. And so I think that the best of the game hasn't been shown yet. I'm sure
I
that there's going
agree.
to be some gimmick, like how with Arkham Knight, the Joker was heavily involved in the game. He was like the
Mm,
main feature of that, but they didn't tell us. I'm getting that feeling because even though they've been trying to show us more of Gotham Knights, they're still keeping such a lid on it. There's got to be more to this game that just isn't being shown yet. And I'm excited to see what that is. Again, I am a little bit anxious at what I'm seeing just because I don't know if it's everything that I want to see. But I do like that they're still giving us that vehicular traversal without tank mode. I like that they're giving us boss battles. I like that they're re implementing some of those things that were missed in Arkham Knight, as well as an arguably more emotional character driven story. So I'm really excited to see it. I would like to see this version of Joker at some point, if not in this game, perhaps in a DLC or a sequel. But yeah, I'm with you. I think you covered it really well.
and the great news about all of what you just said is that for the last several years, we've been discussing this and talking about how we don't know very much about the game and all that sort of thing. Well, at that point, the game was 2 years away. Now we don't have to wait very long. The game's gone gold. We've got 2 months and some change, and I cannot wait to get my hands on the game. And we'll be playing it very shortly. So all the answers to our questions will be answered soon enough. So Jake, thank you so much for joining me for this commentary. As always, guys, I'm going to link his channel down in the description below. Be sure to follow our community, the Gotham Knights, on Twitter. We'll have that link down in the description below as well. And then also his channel, also link a video that he's done recently that I would recommend checking out. Check that down in the description below. Please go subscribe to his channel and ring the notification bell. Be sure to like his videos over there and just support all the content creators of the Gotham Knights group. TM, the one created before the game was announced, might we add. We
That's
didn't
right.
egregiously steal it. Not saying they copied us. I'm just saying that we didn't steal it from them. We're not
Look,
okay. That's all I'm saying.
all I'm saying is we should be getting a royalty here. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
Exactly. All right. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Like this video and ring the bell on my channel as well. Jake's channel will be linked down in the description below. And see you guys in the next video. Peace out.